You're listening to an episode recorded during the time Innovation Fuel was part of University Canada West. We are proud and grateful for the work we've done together, and we want to thank the university for being in our podcast. We are now excited to continue the journey of Innovation Fuel into its next chapter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Innovation Fuel, a business podcast by University Canada West.
Bringing you fantastic stories from accomplished entrepreneurs and key industry professionals. Let's explore the entrepreneurial world through local businesses and our university community.
Hello, Dave.
Oh, yeah, you got to meet first. Hello, Gelareh. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. I'm very excited. Did you see that the Lime is coming to the North Vancouver? It's an electric bicycle.
Yes, that is so cool.
It is so cool. It's a lot of city in US. They have a scooter. They have electronic scooter I tried it. It was awesome.
This seems to be a crux for us because we've had the same challenge. We were the last city pretty much in the world to get Uber and Lyft. Like when you think about this element of innovation and ideation and creation and creating these innovative ideas, whoa, we create that environment. So is there a challenge around how we bring that idea to market? And can that idea be an original idea, or does it have to be?
Yeah, exactly. So, what I think it's a very difficult piece for BC mostly. It's about regulations. So you can have very good ideas, but your ideas, it will stuck because of a lot of regulations, policy, or lack of regulations, or regulator is slow on it. This is one piece that we can look at it. Another piece that we can look at is that one reason for that is the safety. So I will tell you that when we were in the Washington, D.C., my daughter would look at those people who are driving bicycles. She asked me why they don't have helmet, But here you cannot ride a bicycle or a scooter without helmet. You know what I'm saying? It's a good thing, but the other hand, it's going to be very difficult for being innovative and risk taker.
We can look to our neighbors to the south here, and we know that a lot of things have happened. We can talk about financial markets, and when you don't throw regulations at things, what can happen out of these elements? So there is a balance. But I also think there's another side of this thing, and I think we might have this conversation today, is that we do not have to be an entrepreneur. We do not have to be an original. We don't have to create an original idea. We might be able to repurpose an idea in a different way in a new market.
Yes, it's very good to have electric bicycle or electric scooter, but we have to match it with our culture and our regulations. So how we can do that one. So I think that we have a guest that we can answer those questions. Let's welcome Jake McEwan.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to Innovation Fuel. We're so excited to learn all about you, my friend. But before we get into some really interesting conversation, tell us a little bit about you. Who is Jack?
Well, who am I? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a proud British Columbian. I've lived here most of my life with a small period of time in Europe and a little piece of time in Los Angeles. But I went to the University of Victoria and was fortunate enough when I was there to sort of meet a few of the politicians that were in the provincial government and thought I was going to be a lawyer, but got hired to be a political sort of advisor right out of university. And that sort of spawned a whole other career path with me. So I went from, coming from this family of lawyers and assuming that was my path to sort of going into politics, where I worked for a few years. And in that work, I had sort of one of my last jobs there was as the chief of staff to the Minister of Lands. And so I met a number of real estate developers across BC. It was a really active time in the market. It was kind of, this was like 2006 when the market was on fire, and really got into watching, the entrepreneurs in that industry and what they were doing. And it is a big industry in British Columbia. And so I jumped out of that world of politics and first into doing some consulting in development, and then went and worked for a number of developers, first for Concord Pacific, worked also for Intracorp projects and the Aquilini family, and then kind of kept rising till I was the CEO of Celtic Development. But in between there, really started as I was doing that work, I've always had a desire to be entrepreneurial. I mean, as a little kid, I was one of these kids who had the lemonade stand, and I even tried to have a bear removal service, which is probably a topic for another time. So I was always had ideas. And didn't really know how to act on them. And sort of it took me until I was about 30 and sort of doing some of that development work that I sort of just kept having this itch. And through my work in real estate development, I was really kind of getting the closest kind of technology side of that is prop tech. And I really started to get into the prop tech space and saying, okay, what can we do? How do we, what's going on in this space? How do we innovate housing? How do we innovate real estate? How do we innovate, the whole space? Because it's such a massive part of the economy. Everybody needs somewhere to live. And, how do we change that? And sort of that was my segue. So, in between sort of rising as sort of a development professional, right up to the CEO level of a big company, I launched a couple of startups. So, so it's been quite an interesting path, and it's been it's been a lot of fun.
You talk about idea, like you said, idea there, and you said it took a while before you started to see the pathway to entrepreneurship, but then you talked about coming up with the idea and conceptualizing idea. Tell us a little bit more about how you come up with ideas and conceptualize them.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. I mean, ideas are really critical, but coming up with an idea that you can turn into something is even more important. But, for me, I think that throughout my life, I was someone who had sort of a lot of ideas, but I never really thought entrepreneurialism was for me. I didn't really know many entrepreneurs growing up. Again, like I was kind of from this kind of big legal family. My dad is a judge. But, if you've got ideas, if you're one of these people like I am, where you're always spinning ideas, starting to turn that into action is really interesting. But for me, starting to get ideas that seem to be something I could do things with is, really, I think it's important to, get to know, whether it's an industry or get familiar with something. So, if like for me, my ideas are often around real estate because it's what I know the best, and I feel I know it intimately. But really, when I'm looking for the creation of a business idea or a company, it's really about looking for getting to know an industry or a space well enough that you can start to question, how could it be done better? What's missing here? Or what's the value add that could be created? Because once you can start, sort of understanding the space that you're working in, whether it's marketing, communications, a lot of the best ideas come out of that is sort of working somewhere or, being involved in a space and saying, I think there's a better way to do what I'm actively involved in, or there's something missing, or that's sort of where my ideas often come from.
So you're mostly looking at, this is the way you're looking opportunities, that what is missing just in general in entrepreneurship in BC or just in the real estate?
I think sort of generally, and I think specifically to BC, I think what's really interesting is there's a lot of opportunity in Canada, and I do see it changing. But my first idea for a startup that was in the prop tech space was called Jarvis Services, and I got that idea when I was actually living in LA for a period of time, doing some development work down there. And what also inspired me is, in Canada, we're often not the first mover in a space, and I think in technology that's changing, thankfully, and we've got some great examples in BC. But I got inspired by a lot of the prop tech stuff that was happening in Los Angeles and saying to myself, why isn't this here? Why don't we have this is 2014, 2015. Like, why don't we have smart parcel lockers? Why don't we have food delivery apps? And, so a lot of that just came from this stuff's working elsewhere. Like a lot of your ideas don't, often the best idea, Google wasn't the first search engine, right? But that's all we use now. I mean, we all use Ask Jeeves. We all did that. So I think there's this, when it comes to ideation, I see a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck. They think they've got to invent something from scratch that nobody's ever done. And that's wrong. It's bring something into British Columbia or where you live that just isn't here. You can copycat. WeWork, there was Regis Office Solutions, which had 40 million square feet, before WeWork came along. They didn't invent that. So, I can think of hundreds. Facebook wasn't the first social network. There's MySpace. A good idea usually comes from something that's operating somewhere else, or something that you see that you can do better. And so for me, it was that let's bring some of these new technologies that are just trying to improve service delivery around real estate to BC, because there were literally zero.
Absolutely. I think you're right. Do you think it's just about because the entrepreneur on Canada or BC, they want to do something new or it's a kind of culture can be, or people hesitate to try something new? For example, the food delivery, as you said, in Iran, it was more than 10 years ago, it was available. Not app, but through others, just browsers. So, or for example, a lot of other stuff they are available outside Canada, but maybe people are not. I mean, I'm just thinking about maybe entrepreneurs here, they don't think it's not that much marketable for them in here, or they just want to do something original.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things, and I think, thankfully it's changing, and I'll get to that in a sec. I think, Canada, historically, I don't think we've got as entrepreneurial culture as some other places. And that's right through, even into the tax code, to be honest, which I still think needs a lot of improvement. But that doesn't mean we're not. And I see us really changing. I just, I think that from our government policies down, we didn't really foster that entrepreneurial mindset. Like, I'll give you an example. I've worked in the States and founded companies in the US. People down there are they're take more risks historically, and they don't get punished. If your business fails in the United States, you kind of pick up the pieces and you move on. That can be a real limiter in Canada, everything from bankruptcy laws down to just how it's viewed. And I'm not encouraging, business failure, but it is a real part of the entrepreneurial journey, and it happens a lot. But I start to see that changing. I mean, there's we all know about the unicorns that we've seen recently in BC and across Canada, and the venture capital money that's pouring into new startups. So I'm really encouraged to see that changing. And I start to see it filtering through the schools into, young people. I mean, this is a place now where I think we are becoming an entrepreneurial place, and hopefully, one of the better ones. But I think that's more recent.
So I think that you're pointing to the entrepreneur ecosystem in Canada, that it's growing, but it still needs to do a lot of work on it. I mean, part of it is the culture.
I think that when it comes to the market, I was actually involved in a report in 2006 that was really trying to look at, it was looking at technology transfer offices, for instance, and sort of why was Canada producing a lot of technology or a lot of patents, but not commercializing them comparative to other places. And we wrote this report. It was with the government of Canada. There was 5 of us involved. And, I remember through that process, and I went to various TTOs and across Canada looking at, we've got all these great ideas, people generate we have, awesome stuff coming out of UBC and other major institutions. But we just had a sort of a funding gap. There wasn't, there was angel money, but there wasn't that sort of next phase, pre-seed. And I do think that's a part of the market that is changing and getting better, because for years and years and years, that was tough. We just did not have the ability to sort of do pre-seed stuff, or not as well. We had angel money, and then you could get, Series A and stuff. Getting to commercialization was very hard. And so I think that's a recent thing that's improving, but I think historically it's been a real challenge.
But do you think that's a direct reflection of the unicorns that have happened in and around Vancouver? But there's some large organizations that have had success, and they're coming back to Vancouver. Are they bringing more of that money back in, and more of that venture capital seed money back in to support these ideations?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're seeing that. Thinkific, and I mean, there's Greg Smith's a great example of a real then his whole founder team there, what they've done. And I think you're seeing more of that. And there's industries that, frankly, if we go back to that technology transfer office, I mean, I think UBC and some of the biosciences, like, I just think that's going to be a massive thing coming up here in British Columbia. Biotech, we've always had such great research scientists coming up with stuff, and it's great to see some of that turning into, commercialization and those ideas, becoming businesses. I think there's a few spaces, biotech being one, and then just generally some of the other more innovative tech startups that are doing better. And Vancouver's kind of getting on the map. I mean, Toronto is as well, and has been for a while. But yeah, I think it's really changed, and it's great to see.
Do you think that's how much the regulation can affect these innovations? For example, just look at the Airbnb or Uber. So, these type of, we have a lot of very tight regulations that can affect these people, these company come, or we can create such as services for others, such as Uber or, for example, Airbnb. Also, for example, there is in Washington, D.C., or in a lot of U.S. cities, they have something like scooters or bicycles, electronic bicycles that they can share it. But we just started having here in North Vancouver because of a lot of regulation and safety. Do you think in the effect of this entrepreneurship and innovation, the regulation of government regulations?
Oh, absolutely. And I've dealt with that firsthand. And I think it does. I mean, we were like the last major city to get Uber, and a lot of that went to insurance policy. And so that isn't helpful. I mean, it's good that governments finally get there, but we should be a first mover in spaces, not the last mover. Because by the time we get there, often the companies are settled and they are elsewhere, and we have so much going for us. But you've got to get the regulations in line and frankly almost in front of the innovation. Otherwise, you don't get it, right? And a lot of things boil down to tax as well, and that's a whole other thing. And there are tax incentives that I would love to see personally, like you see in the film industry, but that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. But it's really about that ecosystem. And I think Vancouver, what a great place to live. And there's other cities in BC too. You're seeing stuff pop up in Kelowna, Victoria. I mean, the province in general is wonderful. And we've got the talent, just like in the film industry, we've really grown the tech talent. So I think when a company is looking at BC or an innovative founder, there's a lot going for it, but we definitely need to improve the policy piece on a number of levels and try and get that to first mover. And sort of one of the things that for me, which is sort of, I'm not involved in this space on a founder or an investment level really, but I am very interested in it. Like there was so much happening around driverless cars and, obviously AI. And that was a part with my sort of previous life in politics that I have stayed involved in and kind of whisper in the ears of policymakers, like this is a city that should be driving that change, not the last city that allows like driverless cars on the road. And that's an example where I actually think there's an opportunity to grab a lot more of those companies for BC. And we could even set up innovation zones around it to test out some of those technologies, like in the Okanagan, for instance. But I worry that the policy, we will actually, instead of doing that, we might be the jurisdictions that's the last one to allow them on the road. And that's such a missed opportunity.
You tackled something that it's Vancouver or Victoria or BC, most BC cities as a very good places to live. But one reason it's a very good place to live here is a safety, right? I love entrepreneurship and innovation, but the other hand, it's a risk and a risk for society as well. So the regulators and the policymakers, they have to come with a balance, right? So do you think where is the balance?
Oh, there's listen, I'm someone who used to work in the government. Government has an important role to play. Business cannot self-regulate and should not self-regulate. So I'm not one of these libertarians by any means, but I think there's a balance. I think we could do a little bit more, but in terms of just fostering it, tax incentives, a whole bunch of things. But I think, we are probably, some of our financial regulation is pretty good. I think that, there's a little bit more in it. That's a fine balancing act because there's less regulation in some jurisdictions like the US, but I think they get themselves in trouble. And everything from the 2008 financial crisis to, I don't know, the unbridled founder-friendly VC madness that happened with things like WeWork and frankly, Uber for a while, that you have to ask yourself, why did that happen? And what's the role for government in some of those things? And I don't think it's to be a heavy hand, but there's certainly a role to play for sure.
Now, Jake, we've talked about ideation, coming up with that great idea, and then we're leaning towards that world of conceptualization. And what we're hearing in this element is that depending on the environment, the ecosystem around you is how you can actually then conceptualize this. Is there regulations that are stopping you from moving forward? Should you be looking around at different areas where you might be able to, maybe this idea is being born somewhere else, but you want to born it in Canada, and you might have to look around at different communities in order to conceptualize it.
Yeah, you do. And I think that's one of the best places to start if you want to found a business, is look for something that's happening elsewhere that isn't here and deploying that technology. It's almost like a tech arbitrage, so to speak. That was kind of something I did, right? I bought rights to Canada for a CRM software that ran my Jarvis services. there were other people doing it. It just wasn't in British Columbia. And, that's a great place. That's a great place to start. Like and I took my own spin on it and made it my own, and it had unique elements, but I wasn't, inventing the wheel. And I'd really try and say that to a lot of people, because, maybe you do come up with the grand idea, and those that are brand new and the change society, those are rare, but they happen. But more often than not, it's taking an existing idea, polishing it, either bringing it into a new market, or like just taking a different angle on it, or improving elements to it. Like, Google search engines, there were bazillions of them, but they made the interface clean. And AdWords is one of the most innovative economic drivers of all time. So, when those guys were looking at raising money, everyone said, "Why are you doing a start engine?" There's like 1,500 of them. So I think a lot of people get stuck thinking if they haven't completely invented, the wheel, or that they don't have an idea for a company, and that's just madness. Take something, take something you've seen, improve it a little bit, make it your own, and that's a great place to often start.
Well, and we see that out there. You said Google is one of them. AOL came first, and then Google took over. We see Facebook. What came before Facebook? What was it? MySpace before Facebook? And you're even seeing the evolution in the sharing programs. And you got Uber, and you got Lyft, and you got these other institutions that are coming out of it. So there is some truth in this.
Well, absolutely. And even in spaces that seem crowded, I mean, how, is it crowded? Like, I remember talking to someone who I won't name, who I really admire, but I think it was after Instagram and then Snapchat, it's like, oh, social media is full.
Exactly.
And then TikTok comes out of nowhere. and so, there's another TikTok out there in that space that's coming that none of us know about, and something that we're all using is going to die. So that's just the way it works. So again, that's a great place with, ideation is get into a space that, whatever that is, whether it's something that you work in or you're passionate about or you read about, and just either, like I keep saying, deploy it or improve it. And those are often the ways to be successful in the startup world.
But when you talk about like oversaturated market, like when you think about like, at what point do you not move forward? Like at what point do you say, yeah, this is a great idea, it's being born somewhere else, but there's so much congestion in this market. Is there any time and space, or is it all about trying to find a new way of delivering it?
No, I don't. It's not all about it. That's a good place to start, but that's generates your idea, and those are often, like I keep saying, good areas. But what's often the next step, and through Startup Boost, I talk to founders about this sometimes, is you have to understand your market and your growth plan and really understand that, right? And same thing in real estate, like you have to understand your buyer or your renter profile. And so what I often see is people will maybe do what I've said, is they'll have an idea to take a concept or go into a busy space, and it's a good idea. But then suddenly they think, okay, my idea is better, or I've got a unique spin on it, and this market is 1 billion people, and I'm going to get all 1 billion of them. And that's a mistake. You've got to be really realistic, and what's your actual users you're going to get, and what's an actual growth plan. And it's good people want founders that shoot for the moon, but you got to walk a mile first, right? And I see that all the time. I'm going to create this, it's going to have 1 billion people because that's the market. It's like, no, how are you getting your first 1,000? And how are you getting your first, and how's this going to scale, and what's your exit? So it's then bringing that back to the reality of the marketplace and how people are going to fund you, and that's a trickier thing.
And a lot of unicorn entrepreneurs in BC would deal with it. It's they want to go to LA, they want to sell their company to someone bigger in LA, not here. What do you think about it? Is it good for economy of Canada?
Well, yeah, that's just going to happen, because still all the big, if you're trying to sell before you go IPO or something, it's probably going to be out of the States to get to a certain size. But, that's another thing is often there's now, and I think this is because of the sort of VC industry and where it's gone, frankly, in the last decade, is a lot of people just want to push in this, scale. And they think, whether the thing is profitable or not, will get bought out. And that's happened. But, I think, frankly, it's much better to, be a visionary. That's fine. have grandiose visions, great, but bring it back to the reality of how you're going to actually grow your business, and let's talk about profitability again. It's not just growth, it's profitability at some stage, and it depends on what you're doing, scale and all of that. But the pitches I'm most impressed with, great idea, smart founder, team, and then a really thought out plan of how it scales through both profitability and exit. But that has multiple off ramps. I hate to see that this is going to get 100,000 users and we're going to sell for $1 billion. Like, yeah, that's a moonshot. But I love the ones that say that's to be like that have that. It's fine to have that goal. And you want founders that are shooting for the moon, but love the ones that say, no, this is what we need your Series A. This is what's going to happen at Series B. We think, these are the off ramps we might get taken out here by a competitor, and these are the ones we see that could try and take us out. Here's our path to IPO. That impresses me.
Love it, my friend. I'm loving this conversation. And I think you're teeing up something here, because I think we need to go a little bit further into this exit world, because I don't think entrepreneurs are thinking about that. But I don't think we have enough time today for that one. So we'd love to invite you back for another episode. But before we go, we would love the opportunity for you to throw out a challenge to our audience, throw out to our students, to the listeners out there. Is there a challenge that you can offer us?
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you think and you want to be an entrepreneur, maybe you're studying entrepreneurism, I challenge you to come up with 2 ideas. Come up with 2 business ideas and an elevator pitch, and do it in the next week, 2 weeks. Because I'll tell you what, every entrepreneur out there, whether it's the big ones, Richard Branson, everybody, the bias to action is where you'll see the difference. Is it's not that they have the best ideas, it's that they wrote them down and they got going on them. So do that today. That's my challenge to you. Action.
Love it, my friend. Love it. Love the action. And maybe we can get you in the classroom to help maybe do some of that in real life if you're game. But yes, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. That was another episode of Innovation Fuel.
Thank you both.
Thank you for listening to Innovation Fuel. We are on all podcast streaming platforms, Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Visit our website at www.ucanwest.ca/Innovation Fuel. Also, follow us on Instagram at innovation_fuel.